Hi, this is Lisa Klein. I'm here again with Dr. Karen Threlkel, my lovely friend, and we're going to talk more about women's hormones today. A very exciting topic if you happen to be a woman, or probably a man, because they deal with us as well. Probably more men should watch this to women and be like, honey, I need to talk to you.
I have the best idea in the whole wide world.
I heard, I think we need to do. So I met Karen years ago, and you were the one who helped me with my allergies, which was profoundly helpful. And I'm still back. I'm back on the stuff you put me on, which is already helping, which is really good. Thank God.
Good.
So Karen is a naturopath, and naturopaths have similar training in biochemistry to American allopathic medical doctors, except the interventions that they use are au natural. So they are herbs, nutraceuticals, homeopathics, things that are, again, not pharmaceuticals. And what we found by working with Karen is that she does labs in a little bit of a different way. She does deep dives on labs, which has been profoundly helpful pour moi, and also for a lot of my patients. So we're PTs, we're structurists, so we do full body rebuilds, but often we hit a wall because the structure needs to be supported with the physiology, and we're PTs, so we basic supplementation, mostly things that you could buy, in Whole Foods, but we do better lines of that. But if someone is on a lot of medication, or if they're having something happening, especially with hormones, we send them to Karen because I am not messing with estrogen. It's too complicated. And so, Karen, so maybe if you can talk a little bit about just hormones in general, and how, again, my limited understanding is that the liver and the adrenals and the hormones all work together.
Perfect. So absolutely spot on. What's interesting is when women come to see me, they know if they have an idea if they have a hormonal imbalance, either at stage of life or they're just feeling off, and you feel different. So, great logical conclusion, let's check it out. But what they don't necessarily know is that the adrenals are part of that. So in our earlier years, before perimenopause, the majority of our sex hormones are produced by our ovaries, but there is about 15% of our hormones being produced by the adrenal glands. And we really need that little extra edge from the adrenals. Sometimes when women, if they're still cycling, go through a very stressful time, they skip a period. Well, it's because your adrenals were too distracted with all that stress and not giving you that little extra estrogen and progesterone. And you can really feel it. It's just 15%, but you still feel it.
Back up. So basically what I'm hearing you say, because we do a lot of adrenal work, and the adrenals are what get loaded when you're in trauma, shock, stress, trauma, PTSD, all that, it directly affects your adrenals. And you're saying that can directly affect your hormones.
Absolutely. It's just
okay.
Physiology, actually. Yeah.
Continue.
It's overlooked because, as much as I would like to say, just deal with your adrenal glands, your sex hormones will fix themselves and you won't have any problems. You really have to bring it all together. You can't just focus on that one gland, unfortunately. It's a big part, but often you also have to treat the symptom to kind of buy us a little bit of time to let the adrenals get back on track. So
I just picked up a patient who is a guy who came in for stress. And he had also had thyroid cancer last year. He had a very close death in the family, and it was a big deal. And what was interesting is he's pretty young. So it was like, oh, the adrenals and the thyroid are both part of the endocrine system. Is it possible? And we have another one of our patients actually who has a cancer situation happening, and she's been under a lot of stress. So is there then a relationship between the adrenals, endocrine system, hormones, and then your body being healthy, I would guess?
Yeah, we always think of hormones in a triad, the gonads. So, whether you're male or female, gonads covers that. And then the thyroid, and then the adrenals. And if your hormones are not happy in any one of those glands, then they're going to try to help each other out. And that's where you can really see some dysfunction. So in an ideal world, we would treat, if you have a thyroid problem, we'd also treat your adrenals. It doesn't always go back the other way, but if if you don't have good support of all these things, and if you're under particularly a lot of stress, then that causes a lot of inflammation in the body. And inflammation really is the cornerstone of any and all disease. So, we can't say this directly causes cancer, of course, but it certainly can be a good question.
Hello, that would make sense. So, okay, so what I'm hearing you say basically is, because we feel like the thyroid, so many people have thyroid issues, but from what we feel like, the thyroid is usually not the driver. It usually is driven, in my experience, by adrenals, by something else. The thyroid is kind of being whipped around by other things. Mm-hmm. But that being said, when I've gone in and I've had testing, traditional American allopathic labs for adrenals, thyroid are all blood driven. Mm-hmm. Right. They don't even test adrenals very much. So tell me the difference between labs that a traditional allopathic medical doctor, and for people watching, that is what you know as Western medicine, allopathic. It is a certain type of medicine. So Karen is a different type of practitioner practicing a different type of medical care. So the labs she runs are different. So tell me the difference between like allopathic labs and naturopathic labs.
Often we start with the regular allopathic conventional labs, using your typical Quest or LabCorp for things like thyroid. That standard is okay, but it all comes down to the interpretation, which is a whole different world, depending on who you're talking to. You can use, let me back up. Blood is pretty much all we use for thyroid. There are some laboratories that will do it by saliva. I don't trust it as much as blood work. So usually conventional is okay for that. There is a blood spot test that you can do, which is a little bit different. And this might be new information for you, Lisa. I've been incorporating this just into my hormone world as well, because it's just, when you do a finger stick, even though it sounds really remedial, this is what we did when we were kids, but when you poke your finger, you're getting teeny little veins, venules, you're getting teeny little capillaries, teensy bit of lymphatic tissue, and even a teensy bit of fat. So all that combined actually tells us much better what's happening at the actual tissue level, not what's just floating around in your bloodstream. That's what blood work is. So using blood work to see what's going on can be a good pointer in a certain direction. And then blood spot, depending on the situation, in particular estrogen, progesterone, testosterone specifically, is better at saying, well, are your tissues, target tissues, actually getting the amount of hormone it requires? And the target tissues being uterus, breast, skin, bones, brain, and everything else. So we can get to that in just a minute, but in terms of
blood, back up, what was that list again? For what?
All your internal organs. So
okay.
Tissue, your skin, your brain, your heart, everything that makes
it. Okay.
Basically, everything outside of the blood system.
Okay.
So for thyroid, regular blood work can be fine. We can do a blood spot, but I don't find it to be as important. But it all comes down to the reference ranges and your target in that range, because with a reference range, for instance, TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, that is often measured all by itself because it's considered super sensitive, and doctors feel like, well, if that's normal, then everything else is normal. Most of the people that I see are going to say, oh, my blood work is fine. My doctor says I'm fine, but I clearly don't feel fine. So what else is going on? Well, there's a whole lot more to it. And within that range, which generally is 0.4 to 4.5, if you are anywhere in that range, you're considered normal. Most people don't feel well with a TSH above 2. But you're still considered normal. Now, if you saw an endocrinologist, they would probably be tighter than that, but I aim to have the TSH below 2. Also, you want to look at free T4 because that is what's actually stored in your thyroid. And then when your TSH tells your body to release thyroid hormone, because it's sensing it's time for more thyroid hormone, because it's always in flux and it's always determining what needs to happen, your body will release the free T4 and then it gets converted into free T3 in the periphery. And that's actually what does the action for the most part. The T4 is what we need to get into the brain actually, so you do need both, but it is assumed because the normal physiology is your body will convert T4 into T3, it's assumed that's going to happen. That doesn't happen efficiently for everyone. So often,
And what does the thyroid do, Karen?
Everything.
Meaning?
It means if it's easier to say, what do you feel like if it's not working well? You have foggy brain, you have dry skin, hair, and eyes. Your hair is falling out everywhere. Often you lose the lateral third of your eyebrows. That's kind of a classic sign. You're constipated, you're tired, you're gaining weight, even though you're not eating more than you normally do. That's most of it.
So one of the things I found that people know more about their cars and their houses and their bodies, which is fine. It's fine. But the endocrine system is the glands of the body, and the glands of the body produce hormones and other regulating substances. They regulate all these body systems. So I hear you're saying hair, skin, nail, like all these things are regulated by these hormones that are produced by these glands. And
yeah.
I feel like that's an area that can be very difficult, because a lot of our patients that come in are having issues, and so many people say, oh, my labs are clean. It's like, your labs can't be clean, or the lab that you did wasn't interpreted in a way that was very nuanced, or didn't pick up what you needed to pick up. Okay, so keep going on about the thyroid.
Yeah. And so on a lab, often I'll see maybe a normal TSH, T4 looks okay within the range, but then your free T3 is like a low normal. So again, it's normal, but you don't feel great. Plus there's something called reverse T3, which is the brake. So you think of T3 as the gas of the body, gives you the energy. And then the reverse T3 are the brakes, because you're always, you know, going back and forth. You want to stop at a red light, you want the gas to go, but you have to have both. So you want to make sure, even if all those numbers are normal, within the ratio of reverse T3 and free T3, that it's correct. You don't want to have too high of a reverse T3, otherwise your body's feeling more of the brakes than the gas, even though the numbers are normal. And that can make you feel what we call subclinically hypothyroid.
And then you want to make sure that all that free the T4 is being converted to T3 as well.
Yeah, and that the reverse T3 is not overwhelming the action of the thyroid hormone in general, T4 and T3.
Okay.
Plus, to make things a wee bit more complicated, you have antibodies that our bodies will make against our thyroid. And that can be a condition called Hashimoto's thyroiditis or Graves' disease. And with Hashimoto's is more common, and you can have normal thyroid numbers, but again, not feel well. If you don't run the thyroid antibodies, you won't know. It's not typically run, but in our practice, we run those standardly just because we want to make sure. But if you have normal thyroid numbers and your antibodies are starting to increase, that will start over time to cause suppression of the thyroid, because it's going to start to cause a little destruction of the thyroid cells. And
would you have an ANA in
disease?
A positive ANA with that as well?
Not necessarily. No, you would do thyroid peroxidase and antithyroid globulin antibody specifically for the thyroid.
Got it.
Yeah, so I look at that whole picture, and you can do that in regular blood work. It's standard, or regular lab, I should say.
Okay, so when you have a woman who comes to you in a certain phase of life where, you know, and they go to the doctor and they feel like crap, and their labs are like, oh, your labs are okay.
Yeah.
What happened with me with you a couple of years ago. And I'm like, Karen, I'm going bonkers. I feel horrible, but my labs are fine.
Right.
So then I went to you. And so what you did was you ran, so let's talk about some of the other panels that you run. So when do you move on from blood, basically?
Yeah, and that's really unfortunate, because even if doctors are starting with regular blood work, it really needs to be timed to the mid-luteal phase of your cycle to get an idea of where you're at anyway. If your cycle is irregular, that could be hard, and so you might not get good information anyway. So beyond that, I like to use dry urine hormone testing, and it's a really awesome, complete way to evaluate how your body's using or metabolizing hormones. So it's urine. So this is after your body has made whatever hormone it's made, it's in the bloodstream and it does this thing, and now you're collecting the urine after the hormones have done its job. You can say, well, how much is there and how did it get broken down? What's the ratios between estrogen and progesterone? And even more than that, what's going on with estrogen specifically, because estrogen is more than one thing. We actually make 3 different estrogens. Estradiols are most abundant one. And when we say estrogen, that's pretty much the one we're talking about. But then there's estriol, which is a very safe protective one. It's actually the more dominant estrogen during pregnancy. We have a little bit of that. And then there's estrone, which we have just a smidgen of, but it's very potent. And this is the one we actually need for bone health, bone strength. But it's aggressive if it gets too high. And this is just like the conversation with cholesterol. Cholesterol is not the bad guy. We just need to make sure everybody's happy. So with the estrone, we want to break it down further to say, well, what's going on with its metabolites known as 2-hydroxy, 4-hydroxy, and 16-hydroxy estrone. And that really shows us how your body is set up to use estrogen down good, safe, protective pathways or other pathways that might put you in harm's way later on down the road.
This is when I just try and look intelligent because, you know, she lost me at estradiol.
It's so fun though.
I'm kidding. I love this stuff so much, but okay. So no, this is great. So basically what I'm hearing you say is that there's a whole world of labs that we're going to keep talking about that may give more of a knowledge and understanding as to what's happening with the hormones. Because I know when I went to you and you talked about the Dutch test, right? Mm-hmm. Which I thought was named for a guy named Dutch, but now I understand that it's an acronym for trying urine.
Right. Good point.
I wouldn't try urine. What is all about? Anyway, so what happened was when I went to you and you found, and it was really cool to see how all these parts move together. So you've got the adrenals. We're going to talk about this. So that test gives you an adrenal panel.
Right.
It gives you a cholesterol panel. It gives you a thyroid panel, I think, too, in there. Is there thyroid in there?
Well, the one I think you're referencing is called the Dutch Complete, where it's sex hormones and adrenal.
Yeah.
Actually looks at B12, B6, a little bit of neurotransmitters for a stress purpose, but even most important out of all that, it gives you a super accurate inflammation number called 808.
Yes.
That particular test doesn't look at thyroid or cholesterol. Usually those are separate, but.
Okay. Actually, you just triggered a question for me. I have one of my patients who's recovering from COVID and she has type 1 diabetes. The way the COVID hit her, it threw off her adrenals and her whole diabetes situation completely. She didn't have the other symptoms. She had that. So I'm wondering, does that work in reverse? So if you have a lot of inflammation from your body from, say, you know, a novel coronavirus, could that throw all of those off as well? Does it work reciprocally?
I would not see why not. I'm not exactly sure of the physiology, but inflammation basically gums up the works of every system, and whatever your weak system is, that's where it's going to go. So I would totally believe that would interfere with your endocrine system.
All right, that makes sense. Okay, let's go back to you. So basically, if you can talk about some of how the Dutch test looks at those different estrogen and like how you use that information and what you would do with it.
Yeah. So if somebody is coming in just to evaluate their hormone status, it's a really great way to say, well, this is where you're at in time right now in the whatever phase we chose to do this in. But what's most important is that it's empowering to understand how your body works in the long run. So looking at those estrogens, the 2, 4, and 16 that I was talking about, they're considered the good, the bad, and the ugly, depending on how potent they are. We want to make sure those are in a certain ratio because that can be predictive or associated with disease down the road, because the ugly, which is the 4-hydroxyestrone, is so inflammatory that it can cause DNA damage down the road. So that's the one you would want to be on the lookout for if you have history of or family history of things like cancer. So, you know, that's in part why I really like to do that test, because we can say, well, we see a potential here. We can do something about it. That's the best part. If you know what's going on, you can deal with it. And so a lot of this is genetically driven, but you can always influence genetics by diet and lifestyle. And so we know there are particular foods that help your body go down the healthy, safe, protective pathway, which is the 2-hydroxy, and that's cruciferous vegetables. So all of our, you know, this kale kick, it's awesome. It's perfect for this. And broccoli and cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, bok choy, all these great cruciferous vegetables go down the healthy, safe pathway. And I just had a revelation last year when I found out about broccoli sprouts. That's just a powerhouse food of concentrated cruciferous vegetable. And if you put like a half cup in your smoothie every day, that's like all you need for the entire day. And I swear it changes your hormones. And it's helped so many women with PMS because that is an estrogen dominant driven issue. Like basically any hormone issue, or if a woman feels like she has issues around her women's health, often it's because the estrogen is more dominant than her progesterone. So this test will show what kind of balance there's between all of your estrogens as compared to progesterone, but then breaking down those estrogens and saying, well, why are you feeling it like this? Is your strong estrogens just a little bit too strong, and we need to shunt those pathways to safer ones?
So somebody comes in and they give you their symptoms and they're saying that they're feeling, depressed, fatigue, anxious, whatever, weight gain, like different symptoms that women tend to have around this change of time. Mm-hmm. And then you look at the estrogen metabolism pathways and you see where things are, and then you use different foods and supplements to basically help them to even out.
Yeah, we have the conversation of, what are their symptoms? How severe are they? And I really base treatment on not only what the labs say, but even more so by the symptom. Because there are women who come in who feel like, yes, this is bothering me, but I have no interest in getting into hormones or anything like that. It's not my thing, and that's totally fine. There are herbs that are very powerful that can work wonderfully for balancing things out. There are concentrated over-the-counter progesterone creams that can be good because, believe it or not, the first hormone that actually declines as we get closer and closer to menopause is progesterone, not estrogen. Estrogen gets the biggest hype because it's so obvious when estrogen is low, but progesterone is that sneaky one where you feel more anxious for no good reason, or you're not sleeping well anymore, or your body feels tight or tense, you're super irritable for no good reason. Those are all often related to low progesterone just because of this walk through life. Now, why that happened? Probably the adrenal glands, because we've been stressed our whole lives, and we always been a little bit progesterone deficient, I think, for most women.
I feel like the adrenals are really, with our patient population, that's one of the first things that we look at. And so many of the patients that we come in haven't recovered from whatever trauma they had because the adrenals are too loaded. Mm-hmm. And I really feel like the adrenals are just like this frontier of medicine that really need to be more explored. So, okay, so this is a question that I know the answer to already, but it's like all the work that you do is based on clinical research, case studies. I know we work with Metagenics a lot. All their stuff is high research-based, evidence-based. So I know that the field of naturopathic medicine has been around for quite a long time, and that they're, the lab companies that do these labs are all research-based. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right.
There's a ton of like evidence-based stuff behind you. I kind of feel like
sure.
I go through that saying, but I just want to say that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you also go clinically, what works? Things change all the time.
Right.
What I'm doing now to evaluate hormones, especially if it's a new female patient, all the issues that you just named, I'm going to start thinking about, stress is probably the first thing that comes to mind. Adrenal glands are always the cornerstone of everything. So checking that out, looking at hormones, if she's in that phase of life and she's kind of, giving me the signs that that's probably a good direction. And thyroid, of course. So I would probably run blood work for thyroid. I would want to do and actually hormones. If we're doing blood work, we might as well do that part too. But then using the Dutch test to really outline how the body's dealing with hormones. And then I've often been adding on the finger stick test because it's a good baseline. So you get information from all these systems in the body, whether it's venous blood, urine, and then the finger stick that kind of covers everything to really know what's going on. And go from there. So whether you want to support the body with herbs and nutrients, of course, it goes without saying, what we're going to talk about is what is going on with stress. Are you sleeping? What's your energy like? Do you have a support system? What's your self-care? What are you eating? That's kind of a given. But then on top of that, if you need more support, and often we need a leg up, we need to kind of buy some time to maybe make some adjustments with self-care. So how can we have the energy to do that? Let's use some adrenal herbs. Let's do anything that helps the adrenals. Let's go ahead and look at your hormones. And especially if you're not sleeping and we find your progesterone's low, we need to do some progesterone support, whether that's in an herb form or if you're a good candidate for a bioidentical progesterone, it can really work wonders. I find the most joy when somebody comes back and they're like, I didn't realize I lost myself. And now I found myself. I feel like myself again. It's just so wonderful. I mean, it happens gradually over time. You just don't realize it.
I love it. And the person who's helping you looks like
that.
Adele. Like, what's better than this? She's amazing. So I think I need to come see you for another round of Dutch. It's been like a year and a half, probably almost 2 years.
Oh my goodness.
And it's been a while. Hasn't been that long? It's been, I think, a little bit of time.
Yeah.
So at least
probably.
a year. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I'm definitely like, I think I've hit the level like, okay, sleep is no longer something that I do. So like I'm feeling okay otherwise, but the sleep is a problem. So I think I need to circle back with you.
Yes.
But what I'm hearing you say, again, going back to the adrenals, is that there's not really good blood lab for the adrenals. And so the adrenal value changes over the course of the day. So my limited understanding is when you do the Dutch and you do these, even like the 24-hour cortisol draw. So you're doing basically, what are the adrenals doing in the morning and then throughout the rest of the day? Because they're supposed to be higher in the morning, right? And then they kind of go.
Right.
So
yeah, good point. That the testing actually is 4 or 5 samples throughout the day and evening. So you are actually getting a real day in the life of you. How is your body dealing with normal stress? Granted, you don't do this on a day we just know you're going to be stressed. So what is your average day like? And it is reflective of not only that day, but also, the recent past, maybe not 2 years ago, but where you're at in general. And we do have a physiological diurnal pattern we're supposed to follow. So when we wake up in the morning, it's starting to rise. And then a couple hours later, when you're working, you're up for your day, it reaches its peak. And then it should come down gently in the evening, and at night, it should be pretty low so you can naturally fall asleep and get a good, deep, restful sleep. We can have spikes of cortisol in the middle of the night, which is a problem, but we can make an estimate for that. So you do a sample. The way the Dutch does it is this first sample is at dinner time, then bedtime. If you wake in the middle of the night to pee, collect that. First thing in the morning and then 2 hours later. So it doesn't disrupt your whole day, but it's good enough to get a good average over the entire course of the day. And then you can be really nitpicky and tweak exactly where we need to support you throughout the day. More in the morning, in the evening. Is it too high so that you're not sleeping? Well, let's knock that cortisol down a little bit. Is it too low during the day and you aren't being productive? We can raise those cortisol levels gently with herbs, and it can be a really happy, perfect medium of precisely what your body needs.
That's why I think I like about the work that you do is that it's the labs and the assessment is more nuanced. So there's a lot of time spent on the symptoms. There's a lot of time spent on the history and a lot of time spent on the lab analysis. And the labs are done in a way that's a little bit more comprehensive. And to me, again, with my limited knowledge of, it's just like, well, why wouldn't you do that? If the adrenal, if they function like that, then that's how they should be tested. So I think that that's wonderful. So, because we sent you someone recently who is trying to get pregnant and having a hard time. And I had my hands on her. I'm like, honey, your adrenals are just like, sheesh. And so what was great, not great, but it was great when it came back, that's what the Dutch showed. So that was kind of cool.
It's validating. People I know I feel exactly like that at that time of day, and there's a number to it.
Yeah, it's great. It was very, very, very cool. So, so basically, I know what we're focusing on is the hormone piece for women, which is very valuable with people who are not maybe necessarily in the change of life, but may also be trying to get pregnant. And we've had cases where people went on adrenal supplements and they were able to get pregnant really easily, which was good. A million times. So, but also like with PMS, so is it true, if women have really bad PMS during their lives, do they have a harder time during menopause?
As you get closer to menopause, generally PMS gets worse. And I believe that's because our progesterone levels are starting to decline. So we don't have as much balance to, offset the probably normal amount of estrogen, depending on how it breaks down into those, bad metabolites. So, you might be normal, but estrogen and then your progesterone is just slowly declining over time because of stress more than anything. And then eventually your estrogen will come down. So it can be predictive depending on the situation, particularly if you know what's going on with stress. It's a little bit more complicated than that because it does depend on the woman's size. Sometimes, ironically, it can actually be a little bit beneficial to have a little bit of adipose tissue on you because estrogen gets stored there. So sometimes as women go through menopause, they might not have a problem. And guess what? Menopause should not exist. It's not a disease. There are some cultures that don't even have a word for this because they don't go through it. So why do we have a word for it? It's a collection of symptoms that, we generally agree happen. A lot of women that go through this, but why? It doesn't have to be that way. It's stress, it's adrenals.
Okay, so I had this theory that our livers are trying to get back to where they were before we went through puberty, but they can't because we're so toxic. So is it more toxicity, or is it like stress and toxicity, or
Yeah,
stress?
I believe that. Our liver gets taxed over our lives, and it's hard to have a really perfectly functioning liver in this toxic world. So there are a lot of estrogens and chemicals in the environment that we are exposed to. So that's adding to our burden of estrogen dominance. And that's kind of going down a whole different rabbit hole, but very important. So I always encourage my women to drink clean water, avoid exposure to plastics in any way that you can. We live in a plastic world, but try not to eat or drink anything out of plastic. Don't store your food in plastic. And this is maybe a little taboo, but at the same time, believe it or not, bleach is actually one of the components that it gets broken down to is called dioxin, which is extremely harmful to the body and promotes the bad estrogen pathway. So, that's the type of thing, in this world, we have to measure out what we want to do with that information, but
Right.
Something to think about.
I'm noticing, since you mentioned the pandemic, that a lot of my patients are really struggling, and to be under this level of stress for this prolonged amount of time. We've had 4 patients, 3 or 4 kick into a cancer situation, and it's like a couple of these were existing patients that we've known for years, and it's just like, what the heck? So just circling back to kind of listening to your body, and when things seem like they're out of balance, there are multiple ways to assay that. And again, maybe if you're not feeling well, like again, a deeper dive might be helpful, which I feel like you provide in a very nice way.
For every bout of stress that your body goes through, it suppresses your immune system for 2 to 4 hours. If you're under chronic stress, your doesn't really have a fighting chance.
So for like a year of stress, for example.
Yeah. It'll be hard to predict what to expect, but I would not be surprised by anything. Stress is throwing a lot of people into situations they normally wouldn't be in, and having health concerns that weren't there before. I mean, even over a year later, there's still plenty of people who are feeling like they're not sleeping, they're disorganized, they're not productive, their mood is all over the place. For now, it seems like no good reason because we've all gotten used to what's going on, but it's still a constant pressure, a constant worry, and our adrenals are probably not keeping up very well.
So the best thing to do for adrenals, so journaling, walking is great, cardio is great for the adrenals. They like heat, in my experience. They don't like ice, they like to be heated. Saunas, just throwing that out there. Go to Karen's house, be in the sauna. Adrenals, they like heat, because heat in general is a calming, soothing thing for the adrenals. It makes them, they vasodilate, everything's okay. Do you want to talk, we're going to kind of end in a couple of minutes, there's a lot of information, but do you have anything you just want to throw out there as like simple, easy adrenal support that people can use? Like, or does it depend on the person and what they need?
It depends on whatever makes them feel good. If all the things that you just listed make them feel good, that's awesome. Sometimes people need more of an energetic sense. So, the work that you do, or acupuncture, or, Qigong, what have you, I would say pay attention to your body, make sure whatever you are doing is not stressing you, because exercise can be a stress if it's too much for you with whatever you're doing. So getting the support you need, having that downtime, and not being hard on yourself. So many people are worried about gaining weight and eating chocolate or eating whatever. It's like, you know what? It's kind of a coping mechanism, but is it okay? I think it's kind of okay if it makes you feel better
than cocaine. I'm just saying, there are things.
Yeah. This will not last forever. It's okay to have that coping mechanism, whatever it is for you. So sleep is probably the number one thing. Whatever you can do to get good sleep, which might require some, intervention with, somebody that you trust, a physician or whoever, but sleep is probably the best thing ever. And having somebody to talk to, a friend or whoever, whatever helps you feel kind of grounded and remain in this reality of it's going to be okay. Someday it'll be okay.
At some point, we don't know when.
Yeah.
Well, this was great. Is there anything that you want to add? Wrap it up? Or?
There's so much that we can do to understand the body. We don't have to be left with these questions. There are answers out there. And that's the beauty of, I think, naturopathic medicine is, and the fact that we love working with everybody and we all have different answers. We can all support each other on different levels, and these labs are great. And there's so many tools, whether it's an herb or a natural hormone or what have you. There are answers out there. And I think that's just very validating and empowering. You don't have to do it alone. You don't have to guess.
I love that. There are answers out there. That should be your tagline on your website. It's so good. There are answers out there. I love that. Well, this has been so awesome, Karen. Stay on after. I'm going to turn off the recording, but let's chat after. So thank you for joining us. I hope this was helpful. And I'm going to talk Karen into doing this again because it's so much fun.
Thank you so much. It was very fun.
All right. Thanks, Karen.